Hi everyone, today we're going to be doing the challenge for lesson 4, and the challenge for this week is to come up with basically our favorite museum that we like to visit. So since I live up here in Dayton, I decided to choose the Air Force Museum, and specifically that's the picture we're going to be using. So this is in the new hangar, Hangar 4, and that is a picture of the XB-70 Valkyrie. The picture size on this, just so that we can get that determined first, is 2000 pixels wide by 1025 pixels high, and it's at a resolution of 200 pixels per inch. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go ahead and open Photoshop. Okay, and now that we have Photoshop open, we'll go ahead and create a new document. And I'm just going to go ahead and reset this to be 2000 pixels wide by 1025 pixels high. And we'll just reset it to be exactly what it is on the picture. In this case, it's 200 pixels per inch. We'll leave that white background on there and go ahead and say create. Alright, so we've got our background, our white background on there, and we've got everything in place. Now what we need to do is just import the picture in. So I'm just going to click and drag and drop this into the frame. And then I'm going to go ahead and full screen this so that we can have the complete screen area to work with. Okay, so we've got the image in place. Now I want to go ahead and lock this in because should be in the right spot. Oh, not quite. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. Okay, now that's in the center, so we'll go ahead and lock this in. And then I'm going to go ahead and rasterize the layer so that it's no longer a smart object. I'm also going to go ahead and duplicate the layer so that I'm not making changes on my original background layer there. Alright, so there's a couple ways that you can make changes to the colorization on the photo. First thing you can do is you can add an adjustment layer. So we're going to go up to layer, and then we'll come down here to new adjustment layer, and we can do levels. Go ahead and say okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hide that first layer so that I'm not working with that or anything. And then over here, you'll notice that we've got the various levels. Now, in the original lesson that we did, we created 3 different photos, and I think that's what I'm going to do for this. Is I'm going to basically create 3 different photos to put into the image. So I've got this one here, and if you use the level adjustments here, you'll notice you've got your low tones here, you've got your mid tones here, and your highs up here, and it's already set on RGB. Now you can use these defaults, so you can make the image darker, which we can see there, it just made the image darker. We can also increase the contrast. They've got, looks like 3 different levels for increasing the contrast. And that just makes adjustments on the lows, the mids, and the highs to change the contrast. We can make the midtones darker, which kind of brings out a little bit more right here in the center on the plane. And what I like to do is I like to do a complete customization, and you can, if you really want to do some interesting things, you can change the RGB to a specific color like red, green, or blue. And let's see what happens when we do red. So if I change it to red and then I start adjusting the midtones, we can see I get a lot more drastic change on the image. And then if I move it up, once again, a lot more drastic, because I'm basically taking out those midtones and leaving just the green and the blue, because the red midtones are shifting more towards the white, so they're getting blended in with this white here. And then if I move the high end down, you can see I start to get that red back in there. Move it all the way down, and then it really just washes out the whole image, with the exception of that plane. So there's lots of different ways that you can go and do this, and then if you want to undo your changes, you can just click this little undo button and it takes you back. Now that's the adjustment layer. There's another way that you can also do this too, is working directly with the layer itself without adding an adjustment layer. So let's do this. Let's add the adjustment layer. We'll adjust the blue. I'm going to adjust the blue down so that you can really see the contrast. So there's that. When I turn the adjustment layer off, of course we go back to normal, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the copied layer, and I'm going to go up here to image, and I'm going to make some adjustments using the color balance. So in here you'll notice that you can really make a lot more changes, and you can use changes on the shadows, the midtones, the highlights, and you can select which ones you're making changes on. So let's select shadows and see what happens on that. Especially if I adjust the magenta down, you notice we definitely get that purplish background. And then if I adjust the yellow more towards the blue end, definitely get a lot more on that as well. Now, the preserve luminosity is interesting because what that's doing, that's still leaving a lot of that color, the additional color in there, but if I remove that checkbox, it really helps to clean the image up, and it gives it a little bit more of that color definition like what we were looking at earlier. So if I go in and adjust the midtones now, doing the same thing, now I'm getting even more of that color. And then of course if I go to the highlights, that definitely doesn't look like the same plane that we had before. So we'll undo that for the moment. There, we're back to normal here. And I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to duplicate this layer so that I'm not messing with the background and I'm not messing with the adjustment layer. So that's the adjustment layer, and that's the layer for it. I'm going to turn this one on, and we're going to go ahead and make this a specific color. So let's do this. Let's go into adjustments, and let's go to, now let's do hue and saturation and take a look at how this works. So here we're set on master, and what that basically means is that it's the adjustment for the entire image. You can go in and you can set just the reds, just the yellows, the greens, cyan, blue, magenta, your individual CMYK colors, and then your RGB colors, but we're just going to work with the master for this point. So if I go and I adjust, you'll notice my colors definitely change over here on the side. Like you can specifically watch like the tower over here. So if I adjust the color, it's not so much on the plane because the plane is white, but you see these other items that actually have color on them. Like on the X15 here, that is yellow on the tail, and it does have those yellow markers on the front, and the fuel tanks on the sides are red and white like they are supposed to be there. But if I make adjustments on the hue, you can see those change with respect to the placement that I have on the hue. Now there are some different colorizations that are happening over here on these other items. Like I think the cone is kind of the most obvious one, is when I make the change on that. So it goes from that orange down to, you know, like a green, and then over this way to that kind of teal blue almost, and then purple here. And then you can oversaturate, and we notice that up here you're getting some of that saturation effect on the roof. And then when we fully colorize it, that color is being affected across the entire image. So now I move it between the different color schemes in here under the hue, and we get that effect on the image. So I like it on that kind of steel blue background, so I'm going to leave that there. And then up here on this one, I've got that with the adjustment layer. And then I've got the original down here. So basically the way it works, I have this first layer, which I made the adjustments on. Then I've got this one, which became kind of that steel blue, almost black and white background. And then we have the original. Now, what we can do here is we can go ahead and save this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the file first as a Photoshop document. So we'll do a save as. And we'll call this AFMUSEUM, Air Force Museum. And I'm just going to save this, go ahead and save that to the desktop for right at the moment. We'll save the layers and all the color stuff. So let's save. And that's on the desktop there. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to export out each one of these individual layers. So I've already got the original, so I'm not going to work with that. But I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to make this one active. And I want to go ahead and export this out. So I'm going to export this one as a JPEG. And we'll do the same size and everything for it, so it'll be 100% to scale. That way it'll match. And so we'll go ahead and export that. And this one will be, we'll call this AF Museum 1. And that's also on the desktop. So now if we look, there's my AF Museum 1. Now the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to export out the layer that's got the adjustment layer. So we'll close that background, we'll put this one up and put the adjustment layer on there. And let's go ahead, we'll go now to File, and we will export this also as a JPEG. And leave it set with the same height and width requirements, and just leave the scale set properly. And we'll go ahead and export this, and we'll call this AF Museum 2. And again, it's going to the desktop. So that's on the desktop now. And we've got our next image. Now, for the sake of exporting out all three, I'm just going to go ahead and export the original background as a JPEG. And we'll leave everything the same on that. And we'll go ahead and say export. And this one we'll just call AF Museum Original. And that's now on the desktop. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and close this particular file since I already have it saved. And we'll just save any other additional changes that I have. Now, before we go, the last thing that I want to do is I want to make a collage, kind of like how we did it in the beginning. So what I want is, I want the original, which we've got the original right there. So that's going to be in the center. And then I'm going to put AF1, Air Force Museum 1 on that side, and I'm going to put Air Force Museum 2 on that side. Now, the way that I would go about making an image collage for this type of setup is, first I want to figure out what my total pixel height is going to be, or total pixel height as well as total pixel width. So in this case, I'm going to pull up my calculator, and this is a pretty easy calculation, but what I would do is I would take the total width for 1, and since they're all three the same width, just multiply it by 3, so obviously my image is going to be 6,000 pixels wide, and then since they're all three the same height, 1,025 pixels, we'll leave it at that. I'll exit out of that, and we'll create a new document. And this time, that document, instead of being 2,000 pixels wide, it's going to be 6,000 pixels wide. Same height, same resolution, background, all of that. So now that we have that, now we can go ahead and actually import the images in. And so I'm just going to drag and drop each one. And the best way to do this is really going to be to start from the left and just go straight across. So what we're going to do, we're going to do AF1 first. So we'll bring it in. And it's already at the right height and everything, so all we have to do is just drag it to the side and snap it to the grid. So there's one. We'll lock that in place. We'll do the same thing with the original. We'll bring that in. And it's already in there, so it's locked in place. And click the OK. And then we'll bring the next one in. And that one, of course, decided not to cooperate, so we'll have to drag that over to the far side. And then we'll lock that in place. And so now we have our picture collage exactly like we did before. So the original's in the center, we've got the adjustment over here, and then we've got the adjustment layer on this side. So this is the hue and saturation, this is the adjustment layer. Last thing we're going to do, we're going to save this item as a Photoshop document. So this will be AF Museum Collage. We'll save that to the desktop. And then also too, we want to do an export and we want to save this as a JPEG. And we'll leave it as the same name, export. That finished up. And then we're just going to close out of this file, save any changes, which we really didn't make. Exit out of Photoshop. And we're all finished for another week. Thanks for watching.